Mr. Speaker, I think it's traditional in the House to say it's a pleasure to follow the Right Honourable Gentleman. In this case, it is a pleasure to follow the Right Honourable Gentleman, with whose speech I very thoroughly agree. I didn't think, Mr. Speaker, that today's event, unlike that 2 weeks from now, would be of any real interest. I was very wrong, but in a very bad way, because there was a fascinating and rather horrifying series of exchanges before the business began, and then during the opening of the business. And I'm afraid they have driven me finally to a conclusion that I admit over the past few weeks and months I have gradually been forming. And that is, first, that when the chips are down, this government, my government, this Prime Minister, the Prime Minister whom I, unlike many others of my colleagues, voted for when she came for re-election,
yes.
When the chips are down, she will actually prefer to do what some of my esteemed colleagues prefer, and to head for the exit door without a deal,
Yep.
which the Secretary of State informed us is the policy of Her Majesty's government, in the event that her deal has not succeeded. That is a terrifying fact. Second, Mr. Speaker, I fear I was driven to the final conclusion that it is only by legislation that we are going to resolve this problem, because it is only by legislation that the government will feel compelled to act. It does not accept any motion in this House, other than legislation, as binding on it, as opposed, as you rightly directed, Mr. Speaker, to orders which order you to take certain actions and order the House to follow certain procedures by the change of standing orders, which have indeed been things we have done in the past few weeks and months successfully. But when it comes to governmental action, I think it is now abundantly clear that only legislation will compel.
Yep.
And the third conclusion I am therefore driven to is that the bill which the Right Honourable Lady and I and others have put forward, which is a successor bill to the previous bill, that delays, or rather commands, the Prime Minister to take a series of actions which will enable her to find out what delay the House commands and what delay the EU is willing to accept, and then to follow that process if she has not achieved a deal by the 13th of March, is a necessary instrument. But beyond that, Mr. Speaker, I'm driven to the conclusion, and that came out, I think, in the conversation that my Right Honourable friend, the Father of the House, and I briefly had, that we are actually then going to have to do what the opposition Shadow Secretary of State put forward, and what many other honourable members have suggested, namely to find a consensus across this House for a positive alternative, also, alas, by legislation. This is a remarkable condition for Parliament and for government and for this country to find itself in. The structure of our affairs, almost always through our history, since this House first established its rights over against the Crown, has been that the government, Her Majesty's ministers, put forward policy and carry it forward, subject only to the ability first to maintain the confidence of this House, and second, the ability to legislate in this House. It has never previously, in my knowledge, been the practice for this House to have to take control and to direct government policy by legislation. That is an astonishing turn of events. And it is because this House is going to be taking, when it comes to legislate, as I hope and fear it must, I hope it will and I fear it must, when the House comes to that situation, it will be, so to speak, a cabinet. We will actually be making real-life decisions about what happens to our fellow countrymen, not just legislating in the hope that many years later, subject to further jots and tittles, the law as a whole, as administered by the system of justice, will work better. No, no, we will actually be making a decision about the future of this country. How can we possibly make those decisions unless we are properly informed? The process of which we are now at the start is a process that will require the fundamental realignment of the relationship between civil service, government and Parliament. There is no way we can continue to act as if we were merely a body to which the government is accountable. We will have, in effect, for this purpose, for a period, to take on the government of our country.
Well said.